Welcome to Crime Podcast Unsolved Mystery Series, episode 41.
41 already.
I know, right? Time flies when you're exploring the dark side of human nature.
Very true.
But all right, enough chit-chat. Let's get down to business. Today, we're diving deep into a case that's as intriguing as it is perplexing. The Dileep Double Homicide in Kerala, India.
Oh yeah, this one is a real head-scratcher.
Seriously, picture this. It's 2012. A seemingly peaceful evening shattered by the discovery of two brutal murders.
A double homicide. Never a good way to start the evening.
Definitely not. And the victims? Dileep, a successful businessman, and his close associate.
And that's where the mystery really begins.
Right from the start. It's like, what happened? Why?
Exactly. What makes this case so fascinating and ultimately so frustrating is the lack of a clear motive right from the start.
It's like trying to assemble a puzzle without knowing what the final picture should look like.
A puzzle with some pretty dark pieces.
Exactly. Okay, so let's start by getting to know our victims a little better. Who were Dileep and his associate? What were their lives like before this tragedy?
Well, Dileep, he was in his early 40s, a real self-made success story, had this undeniable charisma, a drive that you don't often see. People were drawn to him.
Sounds like he was quite a character.
He was,
Yeah.
built a thriving business, deeply connected to his community, and his associate, well, he was more than just an employee, someone Dileep relied on heavily, someone in his inner circle.
So this wasn't just a random office worker. This was someone Dileep trusted implicitly.
Absolutely.
That adds another layer to this whole thing.
It really does, and it makes the crime scene even more puzzling. We're talking about Dileep's office, smaller building in a bustling part of town. Both victims were found stabbed multiple times.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, brutal. There were signs of a struggle indicating they fought back against their attacker. This wasn't a quick, clean job.
It's not a random act of violence then.
No, not at all. This speaks to a level of rage, perhaps even a personal connection.
Wow. It sounds incredibly violent. Definitely paints a picture of someone who wanted them dead and was willing to make them suffer. But the question remains, why? What could have possibly driven someone to do this?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
And the fact that there was no sign of forced entry only deepens the mystery.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, think about it. Would you open your door to someone who clearly meant you harm?
Unless
Unless you knew them, or were somehow tricked or coerced.
Exactly. Which brings us to the initial stages of the investigation. Police were looking at everything. Business rivalries, personal vendettas, even the possibility of someone close to Dileep orchestrating the whole thing.
Okay, let's break those down one by one. Starting with business rivalry. Dileep was a successful businessman. Wouldn't that inherently make him a target for competitors?
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Right.
But investigators couldn't find any evidence of a specific threat or a recent dispute that would explain this level of violence.
So sure, Dileep was competitive, but was he ruthless enough to warrant this kind of attack?
That's the question.
I guess we'll have to keep an open mind about that. What about a personal vendetta then? Could someone from Dileep's past have harbored a deep-seated grudge against him?
That was explored too. But everyone who knew Dileep and his associate described them as well-liked.
No enemies.
No known enemies, at least. And that's what makes the ferocity of the crime so jarring. It just doesn't fit the profile of someone seeking revenge for a past wrong.
So business rivalry and personal vendetta are kind of fading into the background. That leaves us with the possibility of someone closer to Dileep being involved. Perhaps someone who felt betrayed or threatened by him.
Now that's where this case takes a really fascinating turn. You see, Dileep was involved in some sensitive financial dealings.
Ooh, juicy.
We don't know all the details, but it's possible those dealings ruffled some feathers within his inner circle.
So maybe someone close to him saw an opportunity to benefit from his death or felt threatened by something Dileep was doing. It sounds like we're about to step into a web of intrigue.
It does, doesn't it? However, even with this new angle, no solid evidence emerged to directly implicate anyone from Dileep's personal or professional life.
Wait, so we've got a brutal double homicide, a lack of a clear motive, and a handful of potential suspects who just vanish into thin air. No wonder this case went cold.
It's a real head-scratcher, that's for sure. And with the initial investigation stalling, that's when the theories started to surface.
Okay, I am ready for those theories. I bet everyone in town had their own idea about what happened.
You're not wrong. And some of them are pretty compelling. Want to hear more?
Definitely. All right, so spill the tea. What are some of the theories floating around about this Dileep double homicide?
Well, some are wilder than others, that's for sure. But before we dive into that, I gotta ask, what about the community? What kind of impact did this have on the town? I mean, two people brutally murdered, seemingly without reason, that must have sent shockwaves through the whole place.
Totally. Imagine living in a place where something so brutal and seemingly random just happens. It's got to shatter your sense of security, right?
Yeah.
That belief that it can't happen here.
Absolutely. It's like a crack in the foundation of the community. And it's not just the fear, it's the unanswered questions that linger.
Yeah, the victims' families, their friends, their colleagues, they're all left grappling with this immense loss and a void of understanding.
And that void is often filled with speculation, rumors, a constant search for meaning. Why to sleep? Why his associate? Was it a targeted attack or were they caught in some larger, more sinister web?
It's like the entire community is trying to solve this puzzle, but the pieces just don't fit. Must have been incredibly frustrating for everyone involved.
Exactly. And that lack of resolution can be incredibly difficult to process, even traumatizing. It's like a wound that never fully heals. So let's talk about the aftermath. How did this case impact the community in the long term?
Well, I'd imagine there was a heightened sense of fear and insecurity. People must have been looking over their shoulders, wondering if it could happen again.
You're right. Businesses beefed up security, people were more cautious about who they interacted with. There was a general feeling of unease, especially after dark. It's like the very fabric of the community was torn apart.
And it probably had a ripple effect on everything from social gatherings to business deals. People must have been hesitant to trust anyone.
Absolutely. Trust was eroded. People were more likely to suspect each other, to see motives where none existed. It's a sad but very real consequence of unsolved crimes, especially one as brutal as this.
And what about Dileep's family? They must have been devastated by this loss and desperate for answers.
They've been incredibly resilient in their pursuit of justice. They've advocated tirelessly for the case to remain open, for any new leads to be investigated. But it's a heavy burden to carry, that constant search for closure, especially when the trail seems to have gone cold.
It's heartbreaking. It's like they're trapped in this limbo of grief and uncertainty, constantly replaying the events and wondering what might have been. And with the lack of concrete answers, the various theories surrounding the case probably just add to their torment.
That's the thing with unsolved cases. The uncertainty is compounded by the various theories that emerge. Each one offers a different lens through which to view the crime, but none of them provide definitive answers.
It's like having a blurry image. You can kind of make out the shapes, but the details remain frustratingly elusive.
Exactly. And that's what makes unsolved cases so fascinating, yet so frustrating. We're left with these tantalizing clues, but without the key piece, the motive, the picture remains incomplete.
Okay, so let's revisit those theories, shall we? We've discussed contract killing, financial fraud, even a possible love triangle. Are any of these more likely than others?
That's the challenge, isn't it? Without concrete evidence, it's virtually impossible to say for sure. However, certain theories do seem to align more closely with the facts of the case than others.
Okay, let's play detective for a minute. If we were to rank these theories based on their plausibility, where would we start?
I think the contract killing theory still holds the most weight. The sheer brutality, the lack of forced entry, the absence of any obvious personal connections, it all points to a professional hit. However, as we discussed earlier, the lack of a clear motive is the biggest hurdle with this theory.
So who would have benefited from Dileep and his associates' deaths enough to order a hit? That's what makes it so difficult to understand.
Exactly. And that's where the investigation, at least as far as we know, seems to hit a wall. There's no smoking gun, no clear trail leading back to a mastermind.
Okay, let's shift gears for a moment. What about the financial fraud angle? Could Dileep have been involved in something shady that put a target on his back?
It's certainly a possibility we can't dismiss. Remember those sensitive financial dealings. We know they existed, but the specifics remain shrouded in mystery. Is there a connection there that investigators haven't been able to uncover yet? Or is it possible that crucial information is being deliberately withheld?
Those are some great questions, and it speaks to the complexity of this case. There are so many layers to peel back, and it's hard to know where to even start.
That's the frustrating thing about cold cases. We're often left with more questions than answers. And as we delve deeper into the Dileep Double Homicide, those questions only seem to multiply.
Okay, so we've got contract killing and financial fraud as the frontrunners, at least for now. But what about those more personal theories? The lover's quarrel, the secret grudge. Do those hold any weight?
Those are much harder to assess because they rely heavily on speculation and rumor. While we can't entirely rule them out, there's simply no evidence to corroborate these claims. It's like trying to build a case on whispers and hearsay. Intriguing, but not very substantial.
It's almost like people are looking for a more dramatic explanation, something that fits into a neat narrative. But reality is often much messier than that.
You're absolutely right. And while those whispers might hint at some underlying tensions in Dileep's life, they don't necessarily explain the brutality of the crime. There's a disconnect between the violence of the act and the seemingly ordinary lives of the victims.
It's a stark reminder that darkness can lurk in unexpected places, that even the most successful, well-liked individuals can become entangled in dangerous situations, and that even in a seemingly peaceful community, secrets and hidden motives can lead to tragedy.
Exactly. And until those secrets are brought to light, the Dileep Double Homicide will remain a haunting reminder of the complexities of human nature and the enduring search for justice. It's a case that stays with you long after you've heard the details.
Well said. And that brings us to the end of part 2 of our deep dive into the Dileep Double Homicide. Don't go anywhere just yet. In the final part, we'll explore the lingering questions, examine the challenges faced by investigators, and consider what, if anything, could be done to finally crack this case wide open. All right, we're back, ready to try and crack this case wide open.
Let's do it. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still so much we don't know about the Dileep Double Homicide.
It's true. We've talked about the victims, the crime scene, those initial investigations and those theories. But the question that keeps coming back is, why? Why has this case remained unsolved for so long?
It really is the question, isn't it?
It's like peeking behind the curtain of a perfectly crafted crime, but not being able to fully grasp the motive or the mastermind behind it all. And I think that's what makes these unsolved mysteries so captivating, yet so frustrating.
You hit the nail on the head. It speaks to the challenges law enforcement faces when dealing with complex crimes, especially ones where motives and suspects seem to just vanish.
Poof, gone. So let's talk about those challenges. What specifically made this case so difficult to crack? I mean, you'd think with modern forensic techniques, it wouldn't be so easy for someone to just get away with murder.
You'd think so, right? But one of the biggest hurdles in this case was the lack of physical evidence. No fingerprints, no DNA, no weapon recovered. It's like the killer was a ghost, leaving no trace behind.
Okay, that is spooky. It really does sound like something straight out of a crime novel. But even without much physical evidence, wouldn't investigators have been able to narrow down the suspects based on motive? There had to be a reason someone wanted Dileep and his associate dead.
You would assume so, but that's where the lack of a clear motive really throws a wrench into things. We've explored the possibilities, business rivalry, financial fraud, personal conflict, but nothing's been definitively proven. It's like having all these puzzle pieces that just refuse to fit together.
So are we saying this case is unsolvable? Has the killer just gotten away with it?
Not necessarily. Cold cases have been solved, even decades later.
That's true.
Sometimes a fresh set of eyes, new technology can make all the difference. There's always hope.
Hope is good. I like hope. But what would it take to reignite the investigation? Like, if you were leading the charge, where would you even start?
Well, for starters, a thorough review of all the existing evidence is crucial. Sometimes a small detail that was overlooked before can take on new significance with time.
Like rereading a book and suddenly noticing a clue you missed the first time around.
Exactly. And with the advancements in forensic technology, it might be worth re-examining any physical evidence that was collected, even if it seemed insignificant back then. What was inconclusive years ago might yield new information now.
Makes sense. What about the power of the public? Sometimes all it takes is one person with a piece of information to break a case wide open.
100%. And with the reach of social media, podcasts like ours, we can help amplify that call for information. Reaching a wider audience, potentially jogging someone's memory, you never know.
It's like crowdsourcing justice, almost. Tapping into the collective knowledge and awareness of a community.
Love that idea.
And speaking of our listeners, I'm curious, what stood out to you in this deep dive? What details did you find most intriguing, most perplexing? What theories resonated with you?
Yeah, we want to know.
Share your insights with us, because sometimes a fresh perspective is all it takes to shed new light on an old mystery. As we wrap up this deep dive into the Dileep Double Homicide, I think we're left with a mix of fascination, frustration, and a really deep sense of empathy for the victims and their loved ones.
It's true.
It's a reminder that even in the most ordinary settings, darkness can lurk, and the search for truth and justice can be long and winding.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you for joining us on this journey. And remember, if you have any information, no matter how insignificant it may seem, please reach out to the authorities. Every piece of the puzzle counts. And together, maybe we can help bring closure to this haunting case.
This has been another episode of CrimePod Castle's Unsolved Mystery Series. If you enjoyed our deep dive, make sure to follow and subscribe to our podcast for more intriguing mysteries.
We'll see you next time.
Until then, stay curious.